Just go ahead and get going. I probably bit off more than I can chew, so probably have to use all that I can use of it. So let's go ahead and do it. My name is Randy Fay. I'm the lead maintainer of DDev, which some of you use, and I'm happy to have you doing that. And I've always been interested in troubleshooting and think I'm good at it, and I think I'm good at it with computers. If I knew how to do it with people, I would not be where I am, right? But people is a whole different thing. Anyway, really happy to have you here today. Thanks for coming. My preferred style is interactive. So, you know, I'm supposed to be here in front of the computer where it can properly pick up the audio, and I might not be as good at that. But do feel free to ask or inject if you want to. But if you would remind me to repeat the question, because people who might be listening later might not be able to do that. I'll try to do it, but you know, you just get somebody asks you and you just want to answer and move on. So if you can help me with that, it will be great. So Mauricio Dinarte worked with me on this presentation, and he can't be here today because he's in Nicaragua and didn't get the. Yeah, we were hoping to do this at DrupalCon Atlanta as well. Mauricio is the world's leading expert on Drupal migrations. And so if you haven't looked at his website about understanddrupal.com, which is mostly, I mean, he's been working for years and years and years with migrations. And so you should take a look at that. He's also, the reason that we ended up doing this together is that he is a world-class DDev expert, and not just DDev, but process expert. So when he presented in, maybe it was Portland, maybe it was Barcelona, when he presented there, I was so impressed with how he proceeded step by step in his, you know, he would always check in changes when he was making small changes to try to solve a problem or to add a module. He would check things in. He was very explicit, even in front of a big group, you know, where you're working your way through. It was so impressive. So check out Mauricio's stuff. Like I see, he's an expert, and we can still hope that he'll make Atlanta, but I don't think he will, unless your organization has a little funding for him. So here's our quote of the day: understanding the process of finding a solution is more valuable, more important than the solution itself. So if you know how to repeat the steps and figure out how to approach a given problem, that is far more valuable than just solving the problem that you have today, because you're going to have another problem tomorrow. And if you build these skills, or build all the skills that we'll talk about today and all of yours, then we're all better off. That's where we need to be. Now, debugging is obviously essential unless you don't introduce bugs, which most of us do introduce bugs. And if you understand your problems instead of just work around them, then you can actually understand how to improve your process and improve your future. So it's worth it to that. But one of the things that I say over and over again, and maybe I've already said it today, maybe I'll say it again, is if you don't understand your problems, if you don't actually sit down and figure out what they are, they will hold you captive, and you will just be dancing around them forever. Whereas if you figure out how to take them on, you figure out how to approach that, you'll be good. Do not let anybody sell you a magical mindset where you believe in glitches, or you believe in it just happens sometimes, or any of those kind of things. Do not let anybody ever say that in your presence, because computers are in fact predictable, which is better than people. and every problem is at least theoretically solvable. So if you know that every problem is in fact solvable, theoretically, I mean, we know that things will get away. We can't we can't guarantee that everything is going to be always work or that we will solve every problem, but every problem is solvable, and if you know that, it gives you a leg up. So the core ideas, and feel free to stop me with your statement or idea or whatever, your reaction. Always love to, especially with a small group. That's the delight of being in a group this size, isn't it? So it's great. But thank you for coming, because it's more than one. That's good. More than zero. So investing in your toolkit is fundamental. So if you have a problem today that takes you, that you can't solve, but instead of just being under pressure and having it solved by noon, if instead of doing that, you improve your toolkit, you improve your capabilities, then you are better for the rest of your life. So take the time, if you haven't, if you work with PHP and you haven't invested adequately in XDebug or your IDE or the tools that might work with your IDE, take the time to do that. You just can't not do that, because it is too valuable, because it lets you solve these problems for real. Understand, we're going to do git bisect today. Understand how to do that. I don't do it very often, but it's a lovely thing when you have a regression. And I actually learned a whole new technique that I'll hopefully demonstrate today if I don't use too much time getting there. If you can understand the scope of the problem, if you can just step back from all of these things and understand what you might be dealing with and expand the scope beyond just what you're thinking. Like, could it be like you're used to thinking, we're used to solving a problem thinking, oh, this must be in my code. And if we can expand that thinking, say, oh, it could be the database. Oh, it could be the architecture, or the hardware, or the network in the cases of websites. If you can expand the scope to the correct size of the scope, then you have a win there. So try to, when you're taking on a problem, especially a difficult problem, try to get the scope where you think it ought to be to start. We'll talk about cutting the scope in half in a little bit. We'll talk about that as a key goal. But if you don't start with an idea that is hopefully accurate about where you're going to be, then you have a problem. So if the problem is outside the scope of where you think it is, then you will not find it, no matter what tools you use. So, but then learning how to reproduce is absolutely fundamental. So if you can reproduce any software problem, you can absolutely solve it. You are most of the way done. So the more time you spend figuring out exactly how to reproduce a problem, the better it is for you and everybody around you, and it's absolutely solvable. So when people bring a DDev issue and they say it doesn't do this, if they have a descriptive title of the issue and they explain exactly how to reproduce it, it will likely get solved, right? And that's true of us working with everybody else in all the software we work with. But that takes, it does take special care to reproduce and communicate the reproduction successfully. And if you can do that, you have an enormous amount. Then try to simplify. So if you have something that happens like in Drupal it happens when you hit a particular URL. Can you figure out how to do that with a simpler Drupal site? We have people, as you know, DDEV is an environment that can run many complex things, like whole websites. And so people will have a problem with their website and say, DDEV is broken. They do that all the time, right? It just happens every single day. And they'll say, well, I updated DDEV, and now my site is broken. And of course, they don't say that they also updated Docker and their site, and all these things that you deal with that all the time. But if you can simplify that, so I always tell people, can you make this happen on a plain vanilla Drupal site? Can you do the DDEV quick start for Drupal and make this happen? And it's very unusual that they will have already done that. They haven't. And if they will, then you have something to go on. And then there's like the middle parts of that. So figure out how to simplify and demonstrate the problem in the simplest possible environment you can. And then you have to get creative and think about how to divide that into other parts. So if I have a good reproduction, for example, how can I figure out how to divide that problem into parts? So a classic example would be, I have a problem with my website. It doesn't happen on plain vanilla Drupal. What modules do I have enabled? Can I disable half of them or some number and still demonstrate the problem? Or demonstrate, sometimes that's too hard to do, I know, because there's dependencies and that kind of thing. But you can still do it. And people are afraid to do it. But if you have a local website and you do a DDEV snapshot, then you're set. You can go back to that. And then you can just start chopping away and see if you can understand better which half of the modules did it. And if it still happens after half of the modules, or the theme is changed, or whatever it is that you're doing to simplify the problem, then you can chop that in half and you'll have another hint. So and those are just, the big idea is divide. So in a little bit, we'll try get bisect, which will divide our problems in the commit space. In other words, over time, like where was a problem introduced. But dividing it in terms of the overall code execution path is another easy thing. So in Drupal, you can put a breakpoint in the first or second or third line of the index.php and break there and see if the problem has happened yet. I know that can be hard because Drupal has very, very deep execution paths. But still, if you know at the top level where that happened, if you know at the top level where the problem has happened, then you can step in and step through it. The problem is the complexity of the deepness. But if you can then apply your debugging techniques, you have something to go with. So that this is all a little theoretical, but if you do prepare and then reproduce and simplify and then figure out how to divide up using by time or by execution path or by database or by starting database, if you can figure out how to do those things, you really have something to start with. So that this is a big life strategy thing, right? I don't know whether this all works for people problems or not, or political problems or governance problems, but
Some politicians are very good at dividing.
what's that?
Some politicians are very good at dividing. So I think they do use this.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably a different kind of division than we're after here. Probably a different kind. Any thoughts or reactions or additions to this list of ways to get started?
I know typically what especially if I get a big old ugly error dump, you just cut and paste that first descriptive line and ask Google, and you'll all of a sudden you can kind of see if this particular error is occurring a lot, and then get an idea. Most of the time it's completely different, but a lot of time it will give me at least an idea of where I might start to look.
So if I understand what you're saying, if you have a hunk of code, let's say it's a script, and you take that script and you just comment out the bottom of it, or the bottom half or something like that, and then run it and see what the results are, then that's a strategy for you. Is that what you're?
Well, actually, just even before that, if I just attempting something and I get a big old ugly error message, usually the first few lines will tell you what line of code it failed in, et cetera, and what error code.
That's.
Instead of take that little string and just bounce it off Google for a second, see, okay, this 1,000 people are talking about this, or yeah, I can't find one single thread that's. And
Mauricio has set up a so when you have an error message, when you have an ugly thing that has told you what you need to know, but it doesn't make any sense, but it's told you what you need to know. Mauricio has actually set up an exact example of that for us, and we'll use PhpStorm to look at that. But that actually, one of the things that you're saying is read the stinking error message.
Yes.
If somebody gave you an error message, read the error message. So that's very, very important. And I found, and you'll see in a minute when we get to that, I found that I had only read half the error message.
Yeah.
And if I'd read the whole error message, I wouldn't have to go through the 2 steps that I will probably have to do in a moment when we look at that. But read the whole error message. If you're a developer, put the error message in the first place. Give context. So that's another place is instrumentation. When you are a developer, give your future self some context in your error messages. Write error messages that explain what's going on and give the context there. And that will help at least a little bit sometimes. Any other comments, reactions, ideas, the way you do it?
We'll say over time, I've been doing this many years, error messages are so much better now than they were 20 years ago. It used to just be, oops, you have a problem.
I had a thought, and it actually comes from Swert here. I think he's talked about hammock time, where you step back from the problem for a moment and lay down in the hammock.
Yeah. Or talk about it with your friend.
Yeah.
Or work on it tomorrow. Working on it tomorrow is really good.
Yeah. Or just type it into Slack.
Yeah. Type it into ChatGPT. Yeah.
Have somebody just come stand behind you for a second.
Yeah.
Because I used to have a friend would we work back to back, and she would hit something, and she said, "Can you come take a look at this?" By the time I got up and stood up, she was like, "I got it."
So yes, talking with somebody or talking with ChatGPT or something is a good thing. But do read the error message first. People come with their ddev. They often will post a ddev start that fails, right? At the bottom of ddev start, when it fails, it says, please do these 3 things. Did they do it? No, they didn't do it.
I got scared at the first third of the message.
That's,
Yeah.
so, one thing that we put in here is that it's really important to form a hypothesis before you start mucking with stuff. So sometimes it's tempting to go mucking with the code, and there's nothing that wrong with that. But if you have a hypothesis first, then you're more likely to go on a path that makes some sense. And see if you can frame, especially if it's a hard problem, see if you can talk to somebody about it, sleep on it, all of the things. Sometimes you come back and it's so much better. Do get your tools. Spend time with those tools. Master that IDE. Do use an IDE. Please do, unless you're, unless you think you can make Vim do everything that an IDE does. Use an IDE. It's some things it's just too good at. Understand Git. I recommend that you don't let a fancy GUI tool hide what Git is doing from you. Do it yourself. Maybe that's just an old school grumble, but I find that people that have the fancy IDE, even VS Code, doing Git for them, for one thing, it's horribly slow, but they don't understand what has actually happened because of that. I know that's a questionable opinion, but it is my opinion. One thing that has worked for me really well on hard problems is to do something like a journal. So some people use paper and they just pay attention to what they're doing. When you realize you've got a hard problem, if you are disciplined enough to write down what you're doing to do that, that also will stir the brain, and it's related to taking a nap or working on it tomorrow or talking to your friend. Because if you've written down or you keep notes, however you keep notes, that gives you an advantage there. And use, like I was saying, Mauricio is excellent at using Git at every point that he makes a change. And we can just wipe all that out. But you're talking about using Git not to control your source, but to be able to reproduce where you were when something happened. So if you're making a change, make a Git commit that says, it was starting to work before this, like blah, blah, blah. And then you can go back to that point when you've messed something else up again because you didn't understand it. Of course, have a local environment so that you're not in a foreign place where you have to worry about the changes that you make. You don't want to be in that situation. And use your database tools so you can do a database query. If you don't know a little bit of SQL, get a little bit of SQL so that you can do the kind of searches or use a database browser to be able to look at your database. And of course, use your logs.
The point about keeping or writing a journal made me think of it actually uses a different side of your brain. Uses the other side of your brain. Typing a sentence and writing the same sentence use different sides of the brain.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things that we need to do is to stretch our capabilities here. And so your point is that writing it down or typing it in, or even expressing where you're at in a journalish conception, then you're pushing on a different piece of your brain, and you're giving yourself a moment to mature instead of just mucking with stuff. So that's a good point. We may have suggested all of these things about what to do or disable half your modules, or comment out the bottom half of problem code. If you have something that you don't understand, and you can shortcut it, you can just do that right quick, and you can check that into Git. You're going to throw it all away, but you can do it one step at a time, and it'll help you to understand. I think we've probably beaten logs to death adequately, and we don't forget about printf debugging. Despite the fact that I believe everybody should have full mastery of their IDE debugger, printf debugging is sometimes the only way you can catch something in production or that is time dependent. And so if you use whatever tools you have to add more instrumentation into the code, and you can push that into production on very difficult ones, that can help. And one thing that works really well is grepping your code for an error message. When you see the error message, you can then find it in context and understand it better. So,
Can you go back, please?
yeah,
Um,
here or
use
more?
a graphical database browser?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
do you
yeah.
mean?
Well, like any of the, DDev admin or DDev PHP myadmin or any of those. That
Oh,
let
sure,
you-
sure. Okay.
Any database browser,
Yes.
so that you can see the database, you can see the contents of the database
Right.
without doing as fancy queries, and you can see them better in field by field.
Right, okay.
So the question was, what's a database browser? And there's so many of them, and DDev has support for a gob of them. They're pretty easy to support. Some ways to simplify, of course, we already talked about recreating, but try a simpler environment. Like we said earlier, try a plain vanilla Drupal installation. If you suspect a particular module, try that module in a plain vanilla Drupal installation. If you can figure out how to reproduce a problem and you want to report it to somebody, make a new repository on GitHub, for example. Just push one up there that demonstrates it and make a README that says how to demonstrate it and provide all of the stuff. You'll find that maintainers will be far more likely to interact with you if you can give them a real thing instead of a 20-step list of what you did on your website to accomplish it. But if you give them a simple repository that demonstrates the problem, and then they're very likely to look at it. And it helps you too. It's also like writing down the steps. When you do that, you have been very careful to capture the real problem, and you might solve the problem in that way as well. So, trying changing PHP versions and database type, those are simple things that you can do early in a process. But we want to take the next few minutes and take a look at a couple of problems, and hopefully we can do this successfully. Mauricio worked one of these together for us, and we're going to try to do this one. Well, this is most of what we're going to do anyway, so we'll do it this way. And so here's the troubleshooting demo, and this is out there on GitHub, available for anybody. Mauricio put this together for us. And we are going to do, this is just a Drupal 11, and we are going to go into the troubleshooting demo, and we're going to set it up with a composer install, and we're going to launch it. And the complaint on the first one here is a white screen of death. These are actual problems that he had to debug, and he captured them for us. The one that he had is this this profile called a moonshot, and it just went to hell where the status page would be a white screen of death. So let's see if we can just set this up the way he did in the troubleshooting demo. Make sure that we do what he wants here. We're going to do a composer install and a launch, and we're going to install it. And it's a very strange thing, but like I say, this actually happened to him, and it's not. It's a great example of why to have mastery of your of your tools. So we'll see if we can look at it and read the error message adequately and see what we should do. So we'll do a ddev composer install here. And then we're going to do the installation of it. See if I've left things out. So I think this moonshot is actually in this repository, and I don't know what its purpose was, but it's a good demonstration. So we're just going to get logged in here with the Drush ULI. Our next step here is to just run admin report status. So did that?
Yeah.
No?
Well, you got the way
It's still working. So here is our problem, and here is an error message which is by no means clear or useful, or in a main place where it would be easy to debug. But what I did was I looked straight at that, and I said, well, I won't have any trouble with this. So but you'll notice that I didn't actually read the whole message. But now if I switch to PhpStorm, does it go off? No, it worked. So now I'm going to just go to that place, and here is my, I'm not supposed to have that waiting for us there. Here is my thing, and I look at it and I say, yeah, what is this, and why am I here, and why would I care? It's not in any way clear why we would have a fatal error there, because the fatal error isn't happening right here. Something else is going on. So what I can do is I'm just going to turn on XDebug, and I'm going to tell PhpStorm to listen. I guess it's already listening, and then I'm just going to refresh that page and see what happens. And nothing happens. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So I've got this too big for me to use it properly. That is viewable by you, but I don't think that we're all seeing the same thing. And now we're not in the same place.
We moved up the file, looks like.
Is that, what did I do?
Well, we're not on 238 anymore. We're
Yeah,
at
and I was supposed to be here, right?
Is it that? I thought it was
Uh,
formatable markup. On line 238,
Oh, is that what happened?
I think. There we go.
So that's where we are. We stopped there, and the formatting is hard to see, but you see value is 3, and the message, you know, here I thought I was going to be so smart, but look at the thing is $text must be of type string null given. So it's not as simple as I thought. I thought I'd just solve it by stopping there. So it looks like value isn't a problem. So I can let it go again. So I'm going to hit F9 and let it go again. And this time it's 7. And this time it's 11.1.3. What in the world is all this crap? And why are we going through here? Apparently we're trying to translate something that we don't even know what we're trying to translate. So I can solve this by having a little better here. I can say if dollar value equals nil, right? Null? Null. Is it supposed to be uppercase in PHP? Or it's the same, right? So now if I let it go, now it comes through as null, and this would break everything. And it's still, the size is not really what we want. Let me see if I can get the, oh, it went back to the wrong size entirely. But now that, you can't see that, right?
Yeah,
Big screen.
I can see it.
Just trying to get something that, that we can see what the results are. But, so our whole problem is apparently that we're trying to do string on value, I guess. But now the question is why? And so we can find out why in the stack trace. So if we go to the, if we go to our stack trace over here on the left, we look down through all of these typical Drupal things and say, how far down does it go? Surely it's down here somewhere. How far down here is it? What was the value supposed to be? Main content request, route match. Maybe I can't find it anymore. But if we look in the cache, I found this really quickly the first time I stopped here. Oh, wait a minute. We don't have the right, we're not in the right place anymore. This is really funny because the first time I went through this, I looked in the stack trace and I found my way right away to it. I'm gonna stop that and run it again with it set to stop the first time we see the null value, and see what the arguments were here, and see if I can understand what it was that was happening. So here we have value, and the next level up was calling placeholder escape with value, which was still, now look at what it was. Placeholder escape was on profile version. And so that version needed not to be null. So we are calling this next level up is calling out with placeholder escape on $value, which is null, and it just got $value from one of these percents in key, I think, and key was %version. So where are we going to look for a nil % version, given what we were trying to do here, do you think? My answer was that this is some weird Drupal-y thing about a weird profile that we just installed. And this weird profile, what was it called?
Moonshot.
Called Moonshot. And so if I look for Moonshot, and there's moonshot.info.yaml, if I look at other profiles, what's a standard profile? Umami. If I look at a standard profile, I think it is probably going to have a version in it. Where does the version belong?
It was higher up.
Yeah, this is
Sorry?
It was higher
There
up.
it
It just
is.
said version constant.
Okay.
line 5.
There it is. And it was, you know, with Umami, that version would have been filled in later. But if we look at our Moonshot, so there's a good one. If we look at our Moonshot, there's no version here, right? So apparently, this is what he explained to me, is that in Drupal 10, that worked fine. And in Drupal 11, it works fine like this. But you have to have a version, or you have that terrible thing. I'm going to do a CR here. And now if I run that same thing and I have the version there, then it works fine. So the key there, the first step was find out where the problem happened. But there's no smoking gun where the problem happened. Then find out when the problem happened. We had to set the version, set the item to null and capture it then. Then we were able to look at the context in the stack trace and understand it, even though it's very deep in a completely unrelated part of Drupal. So that's a good reason to understand your IDE and your debugging technique and have them, and then understand that even in Drupal, where context is not always obvious, you may be able to see what you need to see in the stack trace of that. So we are not going to have time to do the other two troubleshooting, so I want to get on to the git bisect, because a lot of people don't have experience with git bisect, and it's way fun. So we'll just do that right quick. The other two, which you can do, and there are solutions for these in the repository. One is where there's a hello world module that doesn't behave correctly, and then a permission for that hello world that does not show up, which is another good way of looking at, even in Drupal where things are done not sequentially, you can find your way to the actual problem. And there is a solution given there. But let's try the git bisect. The idea, we have officially only 2 minutes, but people won't be putting pressure on us quite yet, right? But the idea of git bisect is I introduced a problem somewhere in my code at some time in the past, and I want to know when it got introduced. And it's really easy to do. So if I go and I go into this, the git bisect example, if I start this, you'll see that this is a regular Drupal 11 site, but if we try to launch it, it's going to tell us we have an inadequate PHP version or something like that. So we'll let it come up here. And we want to know why that happened. So if I do a ddeb launch, it says, your PHP installation is too old. But if I do a ddeb php -- version, it's 8.3. So what gives? Well, obviously somebody injected an evil commit into this repository, but we won't talk about that. In this particular case, we know that this is impossible, and we also know that if we went and looked at the install.php, we would see what happened. But now we're going to find out why it happened. And so we know that in Drupal 11.0.0, this was fine. You all ran it in 11.0.0. It was fine. But we know that it's bad here. So I'm going to say git bisect start. And that's the very beginning of this. And then I'm going to say git bisect bad, because this commit is bad. This is one that doesn't work. And now I can say git checkout 11.0.0, which we happen to know was good. I can prove that that's good by trying it, and I should try that. Let's just do a ddeb launch there, which is the same as opening the thing here, and you see it's fine there. So it's perfectly willing to work with us there. So I'm going to say git bisect bad, the good, sorry. It's easy to get confused, especially when you're talking in front of people. So you say git bisect good, and what it does is it goes halfway between and says, okay, it's time for you to test this. And so now if I do the same thing, load the same page again here, it looks to me like it's a good. So I'm going to say git bisect good for that one. And now it'll go halfway in between those. And I can refresh the page, and it's good still. And you see we still have 299 commits to test, but it's it's using a logarithmic technique to cut those in half for us. And now we got a bad one.
Okay.
So we got to the bad one. Now we say git bisect bad, and it goes halfway through, and there's only 7 more steps for me to take now. And this one looks like it's bad as well. So I'll say that one is bad. And let it sit for a second. There is a slight complexity in what I'm doing right here, and that as I'm running on a Mac. Are you all on Mac? If you're on Mac, by default, you use mutagen. And mutagen is an asynchronous layer that when you do a massive change like a git checkout like we just did, it takes a moment for it to catch up, which when you're working on it doesn't matter much. But in this particular case, it matters a lot, because if I check before it's ready, then I don't get the correct answer.
Oh. How do you know if it's ready?
Well, the answer, I'm going to show you in just a second.
Okay.
We're going to force it. You say debug mutagen sync. It only takes it takes no time at all, and it's explicit.
Got it.
And you don't usually care. But, so here we have a good one. So this one's good. And if we do this, well, let's just see if we can do these 5 more steps successfully. And you see that I haven't been doing this one's bad. And this time I'm going to add that debug mutagen sync on there, so that after it changes, it's going to sync. You don't care about that if you don't use mutagen, if you're not on Mac. The value of mutagen is so tremendously high that all of us like to have it on. But there are little edge cases like this where you can mess yourself up. So this one's a good one. And this one's a bad one. And this one's a good one. And hopefully we're getting close. This one's a bad one. And this one's a bad one. And
Well, it looks
look
like
at
you
who
did
did
it.
that.
How did you do that?
So this one is a bad, and it tells me exactly in that last step what happened. So that is so simple that it's worth knowing how to just do what I just did.
Yeah.
It is so simple. Git bisect start, git bisect good or bad at the place you're starting, switch to the place that is good, git bisect good, and then do it. That's essentially all there is to it. It is not, it sounds fancy, but it is really not fancy. And then the last thing is git bisect reset. And that takes us back to where we started. And if you screw up along the way, that's easy too. So if you screw up along the way, like all of a sudden you did a good when you meant a bad, which is easy to do, you can solve it. Now, if you have something more complex, So what I chose was really simple. It's just a broken install.php. But let's say that you needed to do a drush SI at each point along the way. Or you needed to do a new database install to have a correct setup or any of those kind of things. You can do all that. You can do a script that does the correct thing at each level. And our script is going to be very simple. What we're going to do is use this little script here. And this is just going to do the DDEV mutagen sync. And then it's going to check with a curl. Can you see that okay? It's going to check with a curl what we were checking with the browser. And it's going to look for choose language. If it finds choose language, that's good. That's a good. If it doesn't find it, that's a bad. And so all we've done is we made a tiny little script out of what I was doing manually and through inspection. So once you have this process down, you just do this and you do these steps. So I'm going to copy this.
This is smart.
And I'm going to put this.
So a common one there is to like do a config import, right? Because if it's something that changed the config that broke it, you want to import the config every time you do the test.
Yeah, so if you had, so you might need to enable a module. So it's not valid in a Drupal or any complex system to be moving the code around without making the database match it. And so you might have to do a install of a snapshot or install of a, or do a drush SI, something, and enable a module or enable a configuration or something like that. So I am going to put this code that we just copied into a file called junk.sh, and it can't be in the repository because remember we're mucking with the repository all the time. So it would go away and then it would really confuse us. I'm going to make that executable, and now we are going to use the technique here. We're going to do git bisect reset again, and then we're going to use a shorthand version of what we did before, where we did a bad, then we did a checkout, then we did a good. So you can do git bisect start. 11.x is bad, 11.0.0 is good. And so that just does, like we did 3 things to get that same thing. And then we're going to do a git bisect run against our script. So let's see if I can get it right. Git bisect start, 11.x is bad, 11.0.0 is good. So there's our thing. And now we're going to do a git bisect run /temp/junk.sh, and it will go and do what we did manually and hopefully come out with the correct answer. By the way, when I was testing this the other day, I started experimenting with the things that you would naturally have to do, and one of those would have been a composer install. So a composer install at each step is like a totally reasonable thing to do. Look how fast it did that. So all that stuff that we were doing, we had to do it by hand before we understood it well enough to do it. But once we did it by hand, we could do it. Anyway, I was doing the composer install, it slowed it down. But when it's saving you that much time, and you can go have a cup of coffee while it works, it's fine, you know? So making a very correct script to run is just part of your description process. And if it takes a little while longer because you're loading a database at each point, those are all okay. So.
And if you can have your script like send it to Slack with a Slack bot, then it doesn't look like you're blaming anybody.
You can do all
Just
that. do all those things. So. But yeah, so that's our that's what we wanted to do. I wanted to do those other two things, but you can take a look at those, and there's solutions that are not on the front page. There's a link to them, but do try those, and I'd love to have your reaction. Any thoughts or questions or anything else you might have?
Well, this was educational, but it was also very validating because I'm doing some of those things, and part of me is like, am I doing overkill, or am I like breaking it down to? But no, you're using it. It's good.
There you go. Good job. Yeah.
Do you have any other like algorithms or approaches? Like the bisect is certainly one algorithm, but is there like any variations on that you found to be useful? Or?
You know, one thing that I've definitely done over the years with Drupal is to take the index. Oops, that's not going to work. Take the index.php and that's not the one I want. That's the one I want. And at each point in it, it's gotten simpler over the years, so you really actually have to go in to, you have to divide up like this one. You'd probably want to stop there, then go into it, and then divide through it. And if you understand what the side effect is of what's going wrong, then you can look at the actual data and see at which step your data has been corrupted. Drupal's a very deep, monstrous hole that is difficult to figure that out in sometimes. And sometimes we don't understand. It's actually one of the real problems with Drupal is that we don't understand what goes on in handle request, right? How do you get down to the place where it actually matters? But stepping into those and taking the time to understand them and to understand a little bit of the structure is very valuable. So that's a fancier way of saying, take a script and cut off the bottom of it and look at what it did. You know, if you can see what had happened in the middle. So I think we should always be looking for ways to do what you just said. How many different ways can I cut this problem into things? And another, instead of taking a nap, or if you already took a nap, another way of doing it, it gives, if you can figure out a different track to divide it, you can come back after your nap and try the other track. And then you don't wear yourself out. Because sometimes a problem can really wear you out, as you know. Yeah. So.
Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night with the solution.
Which is why that's why you should take a nap, right? So, absolutely, yeah. Wake up in the middle of the night with a solution. That's what we can all hope for. Sometimes we have a dream, and we can see a new. Wasn't it the structure of DNA that was revealed, the spiral structure of DNA that was revealed in a dream?
Wow.
Isn't that true? I think so. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much.